And even at the end of our rope, we refuse to acknowledge the possibility that we might be wrong.
Welcome to the La Casa de Cristo Sermoncast. We invite you to check out our website, lacasadecristo.com, for everything going on at the church. Also, follow us on social media under the username La Casa Family. Now, let's get into the sermon.
Have you ever been in a situation in your life where you're at the end of your rope? You're searching for meaning in your life, maybe searching for meaning and life purpose in retirement, or you feel you're in a job where your skills and gifts are underutilized, or maybe you're in a period of extended unemployment and you're at the end of your rope. Or maybe it's a situation in your life that comes with a doctor's report, or a situation that comes with a brokenness in your family. Maybe there is a situation in which you're recovering from divorce, or maybe from the death of a loved one, and you feel like the sun will not rise up tomorrow. Or have you ever been in a situation where something's just come out of the blue and it knocked you upside the head, like getting hit with a 2x4, and you don't really understand why, as a faithful person, this happened to you, and you're at the end of your rope? We've all been there. And that's why General Naaman is so instructive to us today in this lesson that Frank just read for us. Because Naaman's going to teach us three things this morning that we need to understand in our life, so that when we feel that we're at the end of our ropes, we understand that there is the promise of new beginnings. Now let's understand first who Naaman was. A 5-star general for the Syrian army. The ancient word was Aram. He was a career military man who commanded armies, and he was at the top of his game because he had just come fresh from victories over Israel. He was an enemy of Israel. He was the general of Aram and Syria. And everything was going great for him. He was well-loved, well-liked, had a chest full of medals and ribbons as a career general, until he got the doctor's report that he had leprosy. Now, I think theoretically we all kind of know what leprosy is, but we don't understand how bad it really was. It's one thing to imagine your skin literally falling off of you, your arms, your legs, your chest, your back. But when your nose falls off and you only have 2 holes in your face, when your ears fall off, when the skin is sloughing off your face, you can see why this hideous disfigurement was what caused people to be thrown out of the city into lepers colonies where they had to live separately and isolated from the general population. And all of a sudden, Naaman's at the end of his rope. He has this terrible disease and he doesn't know what to do. So here's the first thing we're going to learn. It's always the moments when you and I are at the end of our ropes, like Naaman was, that God uses that as the threshold for new opportunities and new beginnings. That is the moment when God comes into our life, and whatever setbacks we are dealing with, that is a setup for a comeback. And it is God who's in charge of that, not us. Naaman understood that. I know at the moments in my life of crisis, of adversity, of things happening to me that I didn't seek out, that in those moments, that's where I learned Jeff Ruby's not really managing his own life. Jeff Ruby's not really in control. Jeff Ruby can control very little actually in life. And in those moments, God always uses that to teach me exactly what his paths may be, even though I cannot see it at the time. And the same is true for you and me. Those are always the moments where if we are paying attention, then God will use them for the opportunities for a new beginning. That we're at the end of our rope, something old is dying inside of us, but something new is about ready to break through. That's first, and this is second. It is often the most unlikely people and the most unlikeliest of situations that will bring a new beginning for you and me, that God will speak to us. You see, it's not always in the words of a sermon or a Bible study or our devotions or music or the four walls of this beautiful sanctuary that God speaks to us. In fact, more often, because most of us are only here on the church campus several days a week, so we're living the rest of our week out in the world, that God will speak to us in the most unlikely of situations, through the most unlikely of people. Now, for Naaman, who was large and in charge, who had no need of anyone, that came through the words of an Israeli hostage. An Israeli hostage, a slave girl that the Syrian army had taken in battle. And it was she, this slave girl, who whispered in the ear of Naaman's wife, who told him that he had to go to the king of Israel in order for healing to occur. Now, this was his enemy, the sworn enemy of Naaman. So already he's not happy about this. And then he goes to the king of Israel, and the king's like, do I have the power to make sure you live or to destroy you? That's God's job. You see, that king was a politician. He didn't want to worry about the fact that if Naaman wasn't healed, then the Syrian army would come back on him again. So he kind of backed off that situation. And that's when Naaman got the word, you must go to Elisha. You must go to Elisha the prophet and be healed. Who is the unlikely person in your life that may be speaking to you? Family member, friend, enemy, stranger? Who is that unlikely person? And how can you be that unlikely person for someone else? Now, as difficult as these first two things are, to see the possibility of new beginnings when we're at the end of our rope, and to understand they often come in the most unlikely of places, it is this third point that we get from Naaman that is most difficult of all, that you and I all struggle with. And it is this simple fact, that we have to humble ourselves and listen to God. Now, you've heard that before. You've heard it preached in sermons. You hear it by reading the Word. You hear it in Bible studies, listening to God. You know, there was a survey done recently by an esteemed group of psychologists and, well-researched study. Interesting thing they came up with. They said, anytime you're engaged with someone in dialogue, fully 1/4 of the time, doesn't matter, family member, friend, stranger, 1/4 of the time, 25%, they're not listening to you. Their minds are wandering. Maybe your mind's wandering right now during this sermon, wondering about the Cardinals game and what you're going to eat for lunch today. But the reality is that happens. And then think about that. You do the same thing to other people. That when they're talking to you, sometimes you're checked out, you're disengaged, you're looking at your phone, you're looking at multiple things, you're thinking about what will happen next. So it's certainly understandable, because we're broken and imperfect people, that we often don't listen to other people all the time. But to not listen to God? You see, this was Naaman's pride. This was his pride. And here's the lesson, if we remember nothing else from Naaman, we need to understand. Spiritual healing can never come into your life or mine when our pride is building a wall in our life. Naaman didn't want to go to his enemy. Bad enough he went to the king, now he has to go to this guy he doesn't even know, who's a prophet, who's a no-name. I mean, we've all learned you want answers, you go to the top. The king refused him. And then this prophet tells him, Naaman, you have to humble yourself. Go down to the river. He's like, forget that. We have rivers in Syria. I don't need to go down to your river in Israel. I don't need to go down to the Jordan. But finally, Naaman listens. And he humbles himself. And when he's at the end of his rope, he listens and he is cleansed. How many times have you and I not listened to God? How many times have we so insisted that we are right that in the end it was ultimately wrong, because we so insisted on being right that a marriage was destroyed, a friendship broken, a family member estranged? And there we are at the end of our rope. And even at the end of our rope, we refuse to acknowledge the possibility that we might be wrong. And this is what Naaman had to do. And this is what you and I need to do as well, that when we are at the end of our rope, it's not always about the new possibilities, because sometimes we can't see those for weeks or days or months. And it's not always about listening to the most unlikely in our life, but it is about us. It is about our pride. And spiritual healing can never come into our life where pride builds a wall. So when you're at the end of your rope, I want you to remember General Naaman. Go back and read this story in 2 Kings and understand how hard it was for him to do what he needed to do, but finally he did listen to God and finally humbled himself in the sight of the Lord, so that then he came to faith and worshiped not the gods of Aram, but the one true God, Yahweh. I end with this saying from a rabbi that is so true. Because you see, God is always giving to us in our lives, but when things are going well, we don't really pay attention. It's only when we're at the end of our rope that we tend to be more ready to receive. But God is the giver who is always giving. And Rabbi Nachman once said these words: I crawled across the wilderness of the desert with a small cup, hoping to receive from God a small drop of his water of blessing, when what I should have known was that all along I should have been carrying a bucket, because he would fill it time and time again to overflowing. Our healing can never come where pride builds a wall. And so in the footsteps of a famous general, let us all remember these lessons when we are at the end of our rope. Amen.